We lived with the dust, ate it, slept with it. These are the words of a survivor from a time when the American heartland collapsed. In the 1930s, it wasn't a hurricane or an earthquake that brought disaster. It was a storm of soil, a decade-long catastrophe born from a series of catastrophic engineering failures. This is the story of how the relentless pursuit of profit, combined with flawed agricultural technology, stripped millions of acres of fertile land down to a barren desert, leaving a generation to choke on the consequences. Before we continue, this channel covers what history did to human bodies and systems, not myths. Comment where you're watching from. If this is worth your time, like and subscribe. Before the collapse, there was a boom. At the start of the 20th century, the Great Plains were a vast, semi-arid sea of grass. For thousands of years, this ecosystem was held together by a dense web of native prairie grasses. Their deep, tangled roots anchored the soil, holding it firm against the region's notoriously powerful winds. It was a delicate but stable system. Then came the promise of easy money. Spurred by government incentives and a post-World War I spike in global wheat prices, a wave of ambition washed over the plains. This wasn't the era of the simple homesteader. This was the Great Plow-Up, a time when national pride and personal profit were measured in overturned earth. The engine of this expansion was mechanization. New gasoline tractors and combine harvesters could tear through the ancient sod with incredible speed. One man with a tractor could do the work of a dozen, pulverizing the landscape. Farmland in some areas doubled between 1900 and 1920, then tripled again by 1930. Millions of acres of native grasses, the only thing holding the soil down, was systematically destroyed and replaced with wheat. This gold rush created a new kind of operator, the suitcase farmer. These were speculators, many living in distant cities, who bought or leased land, hired contractors to plow and plant, and then just showed up for the harvest. They had no connection to the land, it was just a number on a ledger. For a short time, the gamble worked. The 1920s were unusually wet, creating the illusion of a permanent garden. In 1909, the Federal Bureau of Soils confidently declared, "The soil is the one indestructible, immutable asset that the nation possesses. It is one resource that cannot be exhausted." This captures the fatal design flaw at the heart of the whole enterprise. The farmers, driven by economic pressure and a blind faith in their machines, had made a grave error. They had ripped out the very infrastructure, the deep grass roots, that held the entire system together. In their desperate search for short-term gain, they had effectively engineered the land for its own destruction, leaving it exposed, vulnerable, and ready to blow away. The illusion of progress quickly gave way to a terrifying new reality. The mechanism of failure was a combination of flawed technique and economic desperation. In the quest for maximum yield, farmers used methods that were fundamentally destructive. The main culprit was deep plowing. Steel plows, pulled by powerful tractors, didn't just turn the soil, they shattered its structure, destroying its ability to retain moisture. The native grasses that had held water like a sponge were gone, replaced by shallow-rooted wheat that left the soil bare for much of the year. Farmers were told to use dry farming methods to conserve moisture. This involved plowing deep to capture winter snow, then repeatedly harrowing the surface during dry summers. The idea was to create a fine dust mulch to prevent evaporation. In practice, they were meticulously grinding the earth into a uniform powder. Every pass of the plow, every turn of the harrow was an act of geological sabotage. The soil was losing its structure, becoming nothing more than loose particles primed for flight. Then, in 1930, the system's final support gave out. The rains stopped. A massive, persistent drought gripped the Great Plains for the better part of a decade. The unusually wet years of the 1920s were revealed to be a temporary anomaly. The parched earth cracked, the wheat withered and died, leaving millions of acres of pulverized naked soil exposed to the constant prairie wind. The first storms were a bizarre spectacle. A haze on the horizon would swell into a low, dark cloud, a moving wall of dirt. At first, it was just the finest topsoil, the most nutrient-rich layer, lifting into the air. But as the drought wore on and the winds grew stronger, the storms became monstrous. The equation was brutally simple. A decade of mechanized soil destruction plus a historic drought equaled a landscape ready to disintegrate. Imagine standing on your porch as one of these storms rolls in. The air grows still and heavy. A strange reddish-brown gloom blankets the land even at midday. The wind begins with a low moan, then builds to a shriek. Then it hits. Not like rain, but like a sandblaster. Fine, gritty dust forces its way through every crack of your house, coating your food, your water, your lungs. The very ground that was supposed to secure your future is now actively trying to choke you. The system had failed. The unraveling quickly became a total system collapse. The 1930s became a decade of literal darkness. The dust storms grew into something apocalyptic, earning a new name: black blizzards. These weren't just clouds of dust, they were rolling walls of earth, some reaching 10,000 feet high, moving at up to 60 miles per hour. They were so dense they turned midday into absolute pitch-black night. Survivors reported being unable to see their own hands in front of their faces. The scale of the soil erosion was hard to comprehend. The disaster affected 100 million acres across 19 states. In the hardest-hit regions, more than 75% of the topsoil was simply blown away by the end of the decade. Geologists estimate it takes nature 500 years to create 1 inch of topsoil. A single one of these great storms could strip that much away in an afternoon. The soil from Oklahoma and Kansas fell like red snow on Chicago and coated ships in the Atlantic Ocean. Life became a desperate, suffocating struggle. Livestock suffocated in the fields, their lungs and stomachs packed with dirt. Farmers who had gone into debt to buy the tractors that destroyed their land now watched as their houses and machinery were buried under massive drifts of soil. The storms generated so much static electricity that touching a metal fence post could knock a man to the ground. Inside, families fought a losing battle against the dust. They stuffed wet rags into every crack and hung wet sheets over windows, but the fine, flour-like powder always got in. Every meal had the taste of grit. A new illness emerged: dust pneumonia, as people's lungs were coated with fine particulate matter. Children wore dust masks to school, only to be sent home when the building itself seemed ready to blow away. The climax of this terror arrived on April 14, 1935. Black Sunday. A colossal storm, the worst of them all, descended on the plains. A wall of blackness made of billions of tons of topsoil raced across the region, turning day into night. Witnessing the event, an Associated Press reporter named Robert Geiger coined the term that would define the era: the Dust Bowl. The storm carried dust all the way to Washington, D.C., a gritty, undeniable message that the nation's agricultural heartland had failed. The ecosystem's collapse triggered a societal collapse. With their farms buried and their livelihoods gone, people were forced to leave. This began one of the largest migrations in American history. During the 1930s, about 2.5 million people left the Plains states. Of those, around 400,000 from places like Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas packed their cars and headed for California. They were labeled Okies, a term that became shorthand for the desperation of the era. They were refugees in their own country, competing for scarce jobs during the Great Depression. The economic toll was staggering. By 1936, the disaster was costing the nation an estimated $25 million per day, the equivalent of over $500 million today. In the most eroded counties, the value of farmland plummeted by nearly 30%, and decades later, much of that value still hasn't been recovered. The crisis finally forced the federal government to intervene. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal rolled out a massive engineering response. The new Soil Conservation Service began teaching farmers how to work with the land, not against it. They promoted new techniques like contour plowing, terracing hillsides, and crop rotation to hold water and soil. One of the most ambitious projects was the Great Plains Shelterbelt. From 1934 to 1942, the government funded the planting of over 200 million trees in long belts stretching from Canada to Texas. These trees acted as massive windbreaks, slowing the wind and holding the soil in place, a man-made version of the protection the prairie grasses once offered. Other programs bought back millions of acres of ruined land to return it to grassland. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The combination of new conservation methods and the eventual return of the rains in the early 1940s brought the Dust Bowl to an end. The land began to heal. But the lesson came at a terrible cost. The Dust Bowl was not a natural disaster. It was a man-made ecological catastrophe, a direct consequence of a failure to understand the mechanics of an ecosystem. The black blizzards were a harsh but necessary wake-up call written across the sky and dust. The story of the Dust Bowl is more than history. It's a case study in catastrophic failure. It remains one of the most brutal examples of how human activity can engineer an environmental collapse. The very mindsets that caused the crisis, a blind faith in technology and the pursuit of short-term profit over long-term stability, are still with us. We see echoes of the Dust Bowl in global deforestation, desertification, and the ongoing debates about industrial agriculture and soil health. The people who stayed and fought to repair the damage left behind more than restored farms. They left hard-won knowledge. The earth is not a commodity to be strip-mined, but a complex system that requires stewardship. The Dust Bowl serves as a permanent, haunting reminder that we are not separate from our environment. We are a component within it. The question it posed in the 1930s is the same one we face today. Have we truly learned the lesson written in the dust? If you found this forensic look at a historical disaster to be a powerful lesson, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. Let us know in the comments. What modern-day black blizzards, environmental or otherwise, do you see on the horizon? And do you think our engineering is any better today?